All right. Well, I want to thank you all for coming for the Alliance for Eye and Vision Research's Rare Eye Disease Congressional Briefing. This is something that we've hosted now for the last couple of years, and what we are trying to do is raise more awareness about sort of the unique needs of the rare eye disease community. We talk a lot about, through some of our other briefings, on very common eye diseases like macular degeneration and glaucoma, things that you may be more familiar with, but this is an opportunity to share more about some of the impacts of rare eye disease, and specifically we're going to be talking about mostly inherited retinal disease. So we're going to talk about who we are at a very high level, what is rare eye disease. We'll have our speakers provide patient experience as well, and sort of their background and sort of what they've experienced with living with inherited retinal diseases. And we'll also have a clinical and research sort of looking at what is being done to try to address rare disease. Some brief closing remarks for those who are congressional staff, a couple of things that you may be able to do and take back to your offices. We'll open it up for some Q&A, and we also do have a Oculus Pro headset for those who are interested at the end of the briefing. We'll have this available where you'll actually be able to experience and see what vision loss looks like. We have a couple of different simulations that we can bring. It's augmented reality, so you won't leave the room. You won't be in a virtual setting. You'll be right here, but it'll give you a chance to see what someone who experiences inherited retinal disease might see in their vision. Whoa, that was interesting. Let's go back here. Sorry about that. So the mission of the Alliance for Eye and Vision Research is to ensure that the best eye and vision care by elevating and educating about the value of vision research. So we serve as the Friends of the National Eye Institute, which is within the National Institutes of Health, and we advocate and support efforts to understand why vision research is important, why vision research needs to be a priority, and what we are trying to accomplish, and the great things that are coming out of research that is funded by the National Eye Institute. And we'll talk a little bit about that today. I want to thank our sponsors and supporters for today's event, the Association for Research in Vision and Ophthalmology, ARVO, the Research to Prevent Blindness, Foundation Fighting Blindness, Alkeus, Genentech, and Johnson & Johnson all helped make today's event possible, and we couldn't do it without their support. So what is rare eye disease? There are over 20 different inherited retinal diseases that are currently recognized that impact people in different ways. Those inherited retinal diseases have been tied to and tracked to about 300 different genetic factors that can contribute to those genetic eye diseases. There are an estimated 400,000 Americans living with inherited retinal diseases. We're going to focus on Stargardt's disease today. That is one of those 20 or so inherited retinal diseases. And we are going to talk about sort of what that looks like and how that impacts people. Inherited retinal diseases generally have progressive vision loss. It can happen very rapidly. Sometimes it can happen a little bit slower. It depends on the patient. But one of the things that's important to understand is that while inherited retinal diseases do impact people in different ways, some may be a tunneling of vision, some may be central vision loss, even within those sort of different inherited retinal diseases, the way that it presents in patients can vary depending on both the severity and the speed at which vision can be lost. The way that you diagnose inherited retinal diseases is typically through, something that is diagnosed once the child or young adult has experienced some vision loss. Sometimes parents may notice something in their child that gets them to go to an eye exam. But it's also something where if people might be at risk for this, genetic testing and doing some sort of sequencing that way can help us to better diagnose and understand those who are at high risk or maybe susceptible to some of these IRDs. The last thing I'll say about vision loss is that it is a very expensive issue in the United States. Currently, it's estimated that vision loss is going to cost the United States about $200 billion in 2025. That's both direct and indirect societal costs. And that's expected to grow to over $750 billion in inflation-adjusted dollars by 2050. You can see over here that the prevalence of some of the more common vision conditions is expected to nearly double across some of those conditions over the next 30 years. So we're expecting that these numbers will continue to rise. With respect to inherited retinal diseases broadly, that alone costs about $31.5 billion every year. And so it is very expensive to treat people with vision loss. It's very expensive from a societal standpoint. And it's something that we believe that the research that the National Eye Institute is helping support helps to find new cures, stave off progressive vision loss, hopefully regenerate vision in the future, but it's also something that we believe can help drive down costs in the future and help support some of that. So today we have two speakers for you. We have Sam Seavey, who leads the Blind Life YouTube channel, and Sam is going to talk to you about his experience living with Stargardt's disease. He's from Lexington, Kentucky, and has lived there for a number of years, and going to share that experience. And we also have Dr. Kenny Fan, who's going to share from the clinical side as a retinal specialist his understanding and focus on how we treat inherited retinal diseases and some of the research that is happening to try to address these conditions. So with that, I'm going to transfer it over to Sam, and I'm just going to switch our slide deck here. And you are all set to go, sir.
Thank you. I'm a little bit taller, so I'll raise this up. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for having me and taking some time to kind of hear my story. So as Dan mentioned, I am... First and foremost, I am a VIP, visually impaired person, but I am also an online health advocate and sharing my life living with Stargardt's and hopefully helping others improve their blind lives. We're going to talk more about that here in a second. But I have a YouTube channel called The Blind Life, and my website is theblindlife.net, if anybody wants to look it up. Oh,
Did the
same thing? I can go back here. I'll reset. Yeah.
Let's do a quick reset for you here. Sorry about that. I'm not sure why.
I pushed the right button, I promise.
Try doing it one click and see if it goes. Yeah,
there we go. So I am also an assistive technology specialist. Some say one of the leading assistive technology experts, and I think that's a bit of a stretch, but I respect that. I work at a nonprofit in Lexington, Kentucky, where I run the assistive technology program, the Bluegrass Council of the Blind, and I work mostly with people losing vision later in life, age-related macular degeneration, diabetic retinopathy, these types of conditions. Hopefully, basically, we teach them how to be blind, because for a lot of people, unless you're born that way, you don't know how to do it when it happens. And I talk about how when it boils down to it, it's just a skill that you have to learn, and that's hopefully what I'm helping people to do. Share a little bit about my vision story, being diagnosed at an early age and growing up with an inherited retinal disease. And the beginning of that, obviously, was diagnosis. So all of these slides are pretty much just stock footage, it's just kind of to help emphasize. So I was diagnosed at age 11, and my sister is 2 years older. There's only two of us in the family, and she was also diagnosed with Stargardt's. So we both drew the genetic short straw and won the low vision lottery. It's not very common for all the kids in the family to have Stargardt's. Especially with the way, and maybe Dr. Fan will kind of touch on this, but I don't remember much about my diagnosis. I remember being very scared, being very, not understanding what was happening. Showing my age a little bit, this was 1986, And the doctors, they definitely weren't talking to the kids. They barely explained anything to the parents back then. They definitely weren't explaining it to the children. So I didn't understand what was happening. I remember sitting in a very dark office, doctor's office. I imagine I was waiting for my eyes to dilate. And I had these very thick contact lenses in my eyes. I imagine they were going to use that to kind of get a good look into the back of the eye. But I in my very young brain, I thought that these contacts were so thick I couldn't even blink. I couldn't close my eyes, and so I thought for sure that they must have glued these in, because how else would they be staying in like that? And I distinctly remember the gritty feeling of the glue. Now I've done presentations for different professionals, and they say no, they didn't glue it in. That's not how it works. But I'm like, I'm pretty sure I remember glue. But I do remember not understanding, like I said, and not understanding why this doctor was doing this, and more importantly, why my parents were letting this person do this to me. And so it was very, very scary. Now, as I said, I had a sister that was also going through all of this at the same time. Fortunate because of this. A lot of people with Stargardts, they're oftentimes the only sibling in their family that has it. We have a representative here who is like that. Her, I believe it was a sister, doesn't have Stargardts, only she does. And vision loss is a very isolating condition, especially if you're the only one that has it. But like I said, I had my sister and I were going through it together, so I was fortunate. And we didn't know anything about this. Nobody knew anything about this back then, and so we were kind of figuring it out together. And because of that, we're still very close to this day. In fact, here is nope. We'll go back. I only have a couple slides, so I can...
There you go.
So this is, let's see. We'll go back. So this is, I can't see it there. Yeah. There we go. So that's my sister and I. We went on a cruise earlier this year together, alone, 2 blind kids on a boat. And it was fantastic. We had a great time. But so I'm still very close with my sister to this day because of that experience that we shared growing up. Now, talking about being a kid with low vision, it's tough. It's hard because you don't want to be different than everyone else, but you want low vision. You have even riding a bike. I could ride a bike, but I wasn't going to be as fast as my friends. I wasn't going to be able to jump the ramps like my friends. I wasn't going to be able to ride the skateboard as well as my friends. So we wanted to be included in everything, but you're always just a little bit separated from everything because of your low vision. And this was no more prevalent than at school. Outside of school, I could hide it. You know, it's a big thing in our community too, is we try to hide it. We try to act normal, blend in. But in school, it's really hard to do that because you have to use adaptive equipment, you have to use large print books, you have to use some type of device to see the board. I was just speaking about this a minute ago, that we are often put into the front of the class, in front of the desks, because the front row, because they want to get us as close to that board as possible. And sometimes I would be pushed, my desk would be pushed up to the wall that the chalkboard, once again showing my age, chalkboard was on, in order to get me as close as possible. But all it really did was further segregate me from my peers who were behind me, and further separate me and make me further stand out and feel different than everyone else. And so it's not fun. It's not fun. I did my best, though. Okay.
Maybe we might need to just go with the arrows.
Yeah, we'll do that. No worries.
Arrows are right down here in the corner.
Okay. So you can imagine, maybe I'll let you, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I got you.
Go back to one more, I think. Is that the classroom?
That's the classroom.
Okay, yeah. You can go one more forward.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yep.
So as you can imagine, these are very formative years growing up. And one of those big milestones is driving. You're visually impaired, most likely you're not going to be driving. But all your friends are getting licenses, and they're learning this newfound independence, and you are once again kind of left behind. The other is very difficult. Next. The other area of that, of early years, is romance, dating. And that's really, really difficult when you're visually impaired. Because it's very dependent on social cues, and we struggle with social environments, social engagements, because I can tell there's people in here. I can, for the most part, tell you guys are looking in my direction, but I have no idea what you look like. I can't see the detail of your face. I can't pick up on those subtle, glances from a lovely lady in my direction, a wave from across the room. No. So it's difficult. And once again, just further separates you from everyone else. All right, next. Now, all of this is to say how important the research into treatments for visual conditions is, because a lot of these, and Dr. Fan, I'm sure we'll touch on this, are designed to help slow down the progression of vision loss. And so if any of this could be avoided from a young one in the future, it's incredibly important. It's too late for me. I'm too old. It's not going to help me. But those who are young and newly diagnosed, it's going to be incredibly impactful. As I said, I've been very fortunate because I have turned my career into advocating for the blind and visually impaired community. This is my YouTube channel, The Blind Life. I'm one of the top YouTubers in our community, internationally, actually. I focus mainly on teaching people about assistive technology and how to adapt to low vision and how to thrive with low vision. But I would easily give it all up. I would give up everything if we could find treatments for blindness. And if there was a world that they didn't need someone like me, I'd be completely fine with that. So thank you very much, everybody.
All right, thank you, Sam. And now we're going to introduce Dr. Fan to kind of come up here and share a little bit more from the clinical and research side, some of the work that's being done. So if you want to risk that.
You can take that. Okay. Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming. I'm Kenny Fan. I'm from Houston, Texas. I've been practicing in Houston for about 3, going on to my 4th year now. I do a big portion of my practice is inherited retinal diseases, and I'm hoping to tell you guys a little bit about what that is, what that looks like, and about the research that's kind of surrounding that whole field right now and the importance of that research. So as I said, I do about 50% medical and surgical retina, so general retina for adults, and about a third of my practice is in inherited retinal diseases. So that encompasses diseases like retinitis pigmentosa and Stargardt disease. 20% of my practice is dedicated to research. And I'm part of a group called Retina Consultants of Texas. I may say that it's, and I have no proof for this, but it might be the biggest retina practice in the U.S. We cover San Antonio, Austin, and Houston, and we're just getting bigger because there's a massive need, as you can see from this little banner here on the side. The growth of retinal disease, the increasing prevalence of retinal disease every year. So I wanted to kind of start off by giving you guys a sense of what it's like to live with a retinal condition. And it's going to be a dichotomy of 2 separate patients that are going through life. So here on the left side of your screen, you'll see that you have Miss A. This is obviously hypothetical. And she's a retired, healthy 60-year-old female who's undergoing just, regular optometry screens, which most of us do to get glasses. The doctor looks in the the back of the retina and they say, well, there's something I see, and I'd love for you to see a specialist. And so she goes to the specialist, and the specialist looks in her eye and says, well, you have macular degeneration. It's very common, don't worry, but we'll take care of you. Then you've got Miss S, who's on the other side. She's 45 years old. She's working. She has a family. She has kids. And she also goes to get her glasses, and she says, I feel like my vision's not been so great lately. And the doctor says, well, I do see some findings on your retina as well, and I'm going to send you to see someone. And she gets diagnosed with macular degeneration. So Miss A, on the one hand, over the next decade develops some worsening macular degeneration. I'll call it AMD. And AMD progresses, but she has, thankfully, some FDA-approved therapies that can treat her AMD and maintain her vision. And by age 70, she's still seeing 20/20 in both eyes, thanks to the advancement of vision therapies and the funding that we have for vision research. On the other side, you have Miss S. Over the next 5 to 10 years, the AMD appears to be a little unusual. It's more aggressive. There's nothing they can do to stop it. And actually, there's no approved treatments for an aggressive type of macular degeneration of this type. By age 50, she's legally blind. She cannot drive. She can't read. She can't work. And now she's fully dependent on caretakers and her family. Miss S is diagnosed with Stargardt disease. And Stargardt looks a lot like macular degeneration, but it is hereditary or genetic in nature by definition, and it's a lot more aggressive, and there is no treatment for Stargardt disease. So what does the economic burden look like for a patient like Miss S in the United States? Well, the incidence of an inherited retinal disease in the U.S., not just Stargardt, but all IRDs, is about 1 in 1,000 to 1,500 people. Other diseases that are that common, or I should say that rare, but you've surely heard of these before, are autism spectrum disorder, cystic fibrosis, Down syndrome. So it's actually way more common than you think, but you can't tell because oftentimes patients can accommodate. They've been living with it their whole life, and you have 2 eyes, so they can often cover for each other. There's also significant physical health impairment. There's difficulty walking, navigating, frequent falls and accidents, and there's a really, really high mental health burden that Sam was alluding to as well. 3 times more likely to have major depression or severe debilitating anxiety. So how do we, as professionals, calculate economic burden? You have to look at the costs directly to the healthcare system, so doctors' visits, pharmaceutical costs, hospital admissions. You have to look at the loss of productivity of these patients, so patients who can no longer work, patients who have to excuse themselves from the workforce, absenteeism. You have to look at the cost on the caretakers, the families. They have to take off work as well and help their family members or their friends travel to and from their visits. And there's something called the disability adjusted life year, which is basically the calculation of the number of years lost in a life plus the number of years lived as a disabled individual. So before we show you the numbers, and Dan actually gave us a little sneak peek, I'm going to go over what the retina really is. When I started my ophthalmology training, someone was telling me about the retina and the cornea, and I admittedly it's so hard to understand what the retina is. So what I tell my patients in clinic is I say, imagine you are in your own eyeball in this room, and it's a giant eyeball, and we're all on the inside. And all the air in the room is like the jelly or the liquid of the eye. And on the wall, the wallpaper of the eye, that is your retina. It goes all the way around except for the very front. And if there's a problem with the wallpaper, it doesn't look so nice anymore. There's a problem. It doesn't function. It doesn't see. And if you have a tear on your retina or a detached retina, it would be akin to, someone ripping that wallpaper down. So now that you have an idea of what we're talking about, we can talk about IRDs, inherited retinal diseases. So it's in the name, inherited, so by definition, it's genetically passed down. And IRDs are so difficult because the symptomatology ranges widely from one disease to the next. And even within the same disease, it can be very different. So you may have a patient saying that they have an inherited retinal disease and they're blind at age 2, and you may have another patient with an IRD who's seeing very well into age 70, 75. There are more than 4 million people with IRDs globally, and that number is probably low. It's about 400,000 in the United States, so, I mean, that's a lot of people. Over the years, we have discovered more and more causes for IRDs, so now we're up to 300 different causative genes. These genes we try to test in large-scale genetic testing panels, but these panels are very expensive, and patients can't often afford them. Luckily, we have the Foundation Fighting Blindness that funds free genetic testing for patients and sometimes for family members if there's a positive hit. And it's a service that I use every single day, multiple times a day. So the most common IRDs, you guys may have heard of these, but one is retinitis pigmentosa. It's about 1 in 3,000. Stargardt disease is the second most common, 1 in 5,000. And then there's a few other inherited retinal diseases like Best disease or cone rod dystrophy that are more rare. This group of 1 in 10,000, 20,000, actually there's quite a few IRDs that are in this category. But yeah, you add them all up and it's about 1 in 1,000 to 1,500. The most common genes you'll see that we find in IRDs, the top one would be ABCA4. ABCA4 is the causative gene for Stargardt disease. So if you find 2 pathogenic mutations in an ABCA4 genetic testing panel, you typically will diagnose that patient with Stargardt disease. There's other genes that cause diseases like RP. USH2A is one of those. Usher syndrome is a devastating disease that claims your peripheral and eventually your central vision as well as your hearing. So you're talking about deafness and blindness. Oftentimes that really reaches its peak around age 45, 50. So severe debilitating impact on the patient and the patient's family. And then a couple of other mutations that we see, EYS, BEST1, and RPGR. These are all very hot topics for research right now in retina. So we have all these genes, we have the retina, what is the connection? So I'm obviously not expecting you guys to memorize this little diagram on the right, but that is the visual cycle. And the visual cycle is similar to an assembly line, like you're making like a Model T Ford or something, right, back in the old days. If the assembly line doesn't produce the end product, if there's a part in that assembly line that is broken, then the end product does not work. And in your retina, every single gene encodes for a protein that is supposed to interpret the light and spit it out on the other end to your brain. And if there's a genetic mutation that impacts one of those proteins, then it can't do that. And then the retina doesn't work anymore. That wallpaper starts to erode. So RP is one of those conditions where we see this very often, and the hallmark of RP is that you get loss of night vision as well as loss of peripheral vision over time, and later in the stages of RP you'll see loss of central vision. This is me just drawing on PowerPoint, which is quite rudimentary, but basically you see that the impact is in the periphery of the retina. So it would be like if the center part of your vision is the back part of the room, all the rest of this retina would be impacted. Someone living with RP would basically, if this is what a normal patient might see, someone with RP would have constriction of their peripheral vision. So this would be mild, this would be moderate, and this would be severe. So you think about the impact of this vision loss on day-to-day functions. Most importantly, navigating, walking, stairs, grabbing literally anything with your hands, certainly driving. I mean, you have patients that have to turn all the way to the left and to the right to see anything. Stargardt disease is a little bit different. So Stargardt, as we have mentioned before, is a similar disease to macular degeneration, but the hallmarks of Stargardt disease are loss of central vision, not peripheral vision, and visual distortion and blind spots that form over time. So going back to this drawing, so basically Stargardt would be just that central part of your eye and the rest of your retina being normal. So another display of what that might be like. So basically, this would be mild Stargardt, so a little distortion and blurriness in the center. This would be moderate, and this would be severe. And you can't look around it. Like, you can't peek around that blind spot. If you look quickly, like, it doesn't go away. It's just always there in the middle of your vision. So let's go back to Miss S. So we know Miss S has Stargardt disease. She's now legally blind. So what does it look like to her and her family? She has issues with transportation, so dependence on a lot of state and federal services for low vision. Obviously, family members taking a big toll to help patients get to and from places. Challenges in the workplace, usually loss of a job is very common, and a huge toll on physical and mental health. So what do the numbers look like? So in this publication, they looked at the total cost and proportion of cost in the United States being close to $31,797 million. So that's $31.7 billion of direct costs from low vision and inherited retinal diseases. So if you look at just RP, that's 9,000 million. So that's $9 billion for direct healthcare costs and $6 billion for Stargardt. And the indirect costs, so just loss of well-being, loss of workforce participation, is around 20 billion. So that's kind of how they come up with those numbers. If you break down, like, what that looks like per category, you have significant pharmaceutical costs, so $1 billion, $400 to $500 million on primary health care and also ancillary help and nursing care and transportation, and then, of course, the reduced workforce participation. So the summary from this article is that considering that the U.S. currently underestimates and underinvests in IRDs relative to their burden in the economy, there is a case for greater investment in these avenues to reduce the cost of IRDs to society. So what I spend a lot of my time on right now is the research of inherited retinal diseases. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that and what that looks like. So in 2017, the very first and still only approved therapy for any inherited retinal disease was discovered. It's a treatment called Luxturna. And Luxturna is treating a rare, super rare inherited retinal disease caused by the mutation of RPE65. So most patients do not really qualify for Luxturna. However, I'm going to show you this video, which I took from their website, and the impacts were dramatic. So on the left side of the screen, you have a patient before they were treated with Luxturna, and then on the right side of the screen, you have the same patient after they were treated. And what they're being asked to do here is, you can see they're being asked to walk along those arrows in a dimly lit room and not hit any obstacles and not deviate from the path, and find their way all the way to the door, and they're being timed so that they can assess whether those patients improved or not after the treatment. And you can see the video on the right is already done because the patient's finished. This is the same patient. And on the left, you can see that the patient can't even find his way through the first one half of the maze. So the impact of this treatment on those patients was dramatic, and it was revolutionary for research in low vision and inherited retinal diseases. So what does this look like for Stargardt? I mean, surely that has spurred the discovery of 10 or 20 more FDA-approved therapies for Stargardt, which is way more common. Well, right now we have 12 active interventional clinical trials, but no, we have 0 cures, 0 approved FDA therapies. There's still thousands and thousands of people out there living with Stargardt with nothing that we can do for them. why is that the case? Why is it so hard? They already figured out how to do it, right? And we know how to do the surgery. We know what it's like for one treatment. Can't we just duplicate that for another? Well, Stargardt is a bit challenging. The gene itself, the ABCA4 gene, is different than the other gene that was where they discovered a treatment. And there's technological hurdles with putting that gene into the eye. There's the complexity of ABCA4 related diseases and how it affects retina patients. And there's the challenge of really being able to assess inherited retinal disease patients on a reliable, repeatable measure. So let's say one patient may be losing all their peripheral vision. So if you test them at the eye doctors every time, they're going to be 20/20. But they're going to tell you, well, I really can't see at night and I can't see in the periphery. But if in a clinical trial you say, well, the FDA just cares about 20/20 vision, well, of course, nothing will ever be approved. So these endpoints and these tests are super hard to determine and assess as uniform across the entire population. So what we do right now for gene therapy is we take this little, this hexagon, which is a viral vector, an adeno-associated viral vector, and we put the DNA into that vector. So scientists have found a way to put a gene, a working gene, into the vector, and then essentially inject that gene into the retina through surgery. So these are the types of things that we do in the operating room. But the ABCA4 is like, it's a third too large for this vector. You can't package it all into the vector. So you can either deliver just part of the gene, but then if a patient has a mutation outside of that area of the gene that we're giving, then it won't work for that patient. You could split the gene in half and deliver 2 vectors and then recombine them inside the cell. Obviously, that sounds extremely complicated, and it is extremely complicated. Or you could find a different vehicle to deliver the ABCA4 gene. Scientists are doing all of these things right now. As I said before, ABCA4 is very complex. I don't think any of you guys are retina specialists. But just looking at these pictures, you can tell that they all look a little bit different. And this is the same gene. It's not like cystic fibrosis where, the presentation is very similar among all patients. These types of vision loss all will present differently. So imagine being able to diagnose patients consistently who have ABCA4 gene mutations across the entire population. It's very, very difficult. And then, as I said before, what is the best way for us to measure whether a Stargardt patient is actually getting better or getting worse? Do we use the maze, as we saw earlier? Do we use the Snellen 20/20 chart that you take at the driver's test? Do we use low lumens vision, like check your vision when we turn out all the lights? Do we turn them all on? Establishing endpoints to test Stargardt disease and other inherited retinal diseases is very, very challenging. I would say it's probably one of the top issues that retina specialists are dealing with right now in developing drugs for clinical trials. So, talking about clinical trials, we've got a couple of phases. You guys have probably heard about these before, but in phase 1, that's when this is what we call first in humans. So they've never been tested in humans. Is it safe? Phase 2 is, okay, we know it's safe, but what is the best dose? So you increase the dose over time, and you make sure that the patients are still safe and that they're showing some positive results from the treatment. And phase 3 is when you create a very large clinical trial on a larger scale to assess the efficacy of the treatment so that you can go to the FDA and get the treatment approved. I'm just going to end with where we are right now with Stargardt. So this is not all the treatments that we have, but there are multiple treatments in clinical trial development phase. There's one which is in a phase 1 to 2, looking at just half of the ABCA4 gene. So if you're a patient that has mutations on the first half of ABCA4, this treatment could potentially work for you. We've got One, looking at the dual ABCA4 vector, which is the splicing and the recombining of the two halves inside the eye. We've got a company looking at a modifier gene therapy. The way I look at this is sort of just injecting the medicine improves the overall health of the retina and the survivability of the retinal tissue. There's one group looking at oral metformin, which is supposed to allow the eye to handle the mutations from ABCA4 in the eye and prevent progression. We've spoken a few times about Alkeus already. They have a modified vitamin A treatment. We know that in Stargardt disease, the eye cannot handle too much vitamin A, so the vitamin A builds up and builds up and builds up and causes damage to the retina. And so this modified treatment is supposed to reduce the buildup of vitamin A and reduce the damage from Stargardt disease. And we've got another oral pill looking at a retinal binding protein 4 antagonist, which is also supposed to reduce the buildup of damage in the eye in patients with Stargardt. So there's quite a few. This is not all of them, but these are the main ones that are sort of at the forefront. So just to conclude, I do believe we're in a really great phase of research for inherited retinal diseases and for Stargardt disease, but we're not there yet. We don't have a cure. We don't have an FDA-approved treatment, not for Stargardt disease. There's so much more to be done, and I think it's important that you guys walk away here knowing that there's a massive burden on the patients, the families, the caretakers, and the system, the healthcare system, and we hope that you'll all join us in this fight to prevent blindness.
All right, just a couple of wrap-up slides, and then you guys can try out the virtual reality here.
If we have any questions.
Yes, yeah. So again, I do want to thank all of our sponsors for helping bring today's briefing to you all. We can't do it without the support from our sponsors and our partners. All of our member organizations are vital in that effort, so we thank them. And I kind of want to leave you all with some things that, especially for the folks that are here on the Hill, the things that you might be able to do. So first and foremost, a lot of those treatments, a lot of those research projects that Dr. Fan touched on are being funded or have been funded or were started from, and some of the discoveries were from funding that initiated from the NIH, specifically the National Eye Institute. The National Eye Institute is one of 27 existing institutes within NIH in its current structure. Last year, the House did propose a restructuring of NIH, a consolidation of the institutes from 27 institutes down to 15. That was a proposal from McMorris Rogers' office before her retirement. And it would have consolidated Vision Research, National Eye Institute, into a Neuroscience and Brain Research Institute. The administration's budget proposal proposes a similar consolidation, with the National Eye Institute going into neuroscience and brain. We didn't talk a whole lot about the brain here today. The retina is tied to the brain. There is a window to the brain from the eye, but it is important to understand that the eye is distinct and separate from the brain. And by keeping and maintaining a focus on vision research and vision care, we have an opportunity to be able to promote and elevate vision research. And I think, one thing that some people that may not know is actually vision research came from neuroscience and brain research. Back in the 1960s, it was part of neuroscience and brain. It was pulled out of neuroscience and brain as an independent institute in 1968 and has been established that way ever since. You heard about the first FDA-approved gene therapy was in the eye, again, funded in part from research that started within the National Eye Institute. Those advancements that you're seeing in gene therapies, not just in the eye, are a result of the investment in research funding for NIH as a whole and specifically for vision researchers. So I encourage you to support NIH and support NIH as a dedicated, sort of its existing structure, support vision as a national priority to help reduce some of these economic burdens and the burdens on patients and families. I also encourage you to join the Vision Caucus. The Vision Caucus is a bipartisan caucus. It's one of our partners, Prevent Blindness, does a lot of work with that Vision Caucus, and it's incredibly helpful to have supporters on the Vision Caucus. So if your member is not a member of the Vision Caucus, I urge you to look into that. I'd also urge you to support and sign on to the Early Detection of Vision Impairments for Children Act, the EDVI Act. It was introduced again with bipartisan support. It is not